What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? That is as solemn as it is sweet, with an outpouring of soul that connects us. Joy in resilience, joy in creativity, joy in happiness, joy in strength. What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? A joy supreme. AARP celebrates Black joy. Visit us at aarp.org/Black community.
Discover opportunities at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Be sure to visit the Madam Beauty Bar at the Walmart booth. Then stop by the Goldman Sachs booth for a professional headshot. Stop by Equitable's booth for your last chance to enter the raffle to win a Telfar bag. Raffle closes at 2 p.m. Lastly, join Amazon for movie night beginning at 7 p.m. back here in the ballroom. And now I'd like to welcome the President and CEO of Black Enterprise, Earl Bushgraves, Jr.
Before we get started with our conversations that count, I wanted to take a moment to thank, most importantly, the Black Enterprise staff. This event and hosting 1,200 extraordinary women could not take place without their committed effort. And you've seen many of them behind the scenes in some cases and all over the place, but I can tell you it takes a village to put this on. And you only get a chance to see a few of us, so I would like to ask them if you could bring up the lights a little bit, and I'd like the Black Enterprise staff to stand, and I'd like you all to thank them for all of their hard work. Thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank, in particular, my woman of power, who's been here and does a lot of things behind the scenes, but she's what makes it possible for me to be able to do what I'm able to do. So I want to introduce my wife, Roberta Graves, if she would stand. It is now time for conversations that count, and for us to take a lesson, meaning we are going to receive several needed guided principles for successful women leaders in the modern age. It is always powerful when truly successful individuals reveal not just how they made it, but how they made it through their moments of doubt and disappointment. So right now, in a Women of Power exclusive, we have a dynamic and true achiever, Peggy Alford, the Executive Vice President for Global Sales at PayPal, where she leads commercial and customer success teams worldwide. In addition, she serves as an executive sponsor for Amplify, PayPal's community of members and allies working together to empower the Black community across the globe. Black Enterprise's former Women of Power Chief Brand Officer, Clarke, will share some of the most compelling subjects from her new book, Take a Lesson, Today's Black Achievers, on how they made it and what they learned along the way. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ms. Peggy Alford and Clarke.
Okay, so that was easy. Haven't had heels on in, 2 years. It's so great to look out, isn't it, Peggy, and see all of you. Welcome back. It's just
Beautiful room.
good to be back. Peggy was actually here at the last Women of Power also with many of you. So this is a real reunion. Thank you for joining us today. So this is the second edition of a book that I first wrote for Black Enterprise Books 20 years ago, pre-9/11, pre-pandemic. Totally different world, totally different time. And the publisher wanted a second edition. And Peggy was kind enough, when I reached out to gather a new group of people, she said yes right away, which, as you can imagine, it's a hard thing to do, to really tell your story in this lasting a way. And she admitted to me today, and we could talk about it later, that she didn't tell her mother that she was in this book. So that gives you an idea that she really came strong in the book. So I just want to start, Peggy, you and I connected some years ago over the fact that we were both adopted as infants. And so much of what we struggle with, particularly as Black women in corporate spaces, you know this, is a sense of belonging. How do you find your fit? How do you find your tribe? How do you establish that space where you're going to be validated and felt like you're seen and understood? And one of the things that is so powerful about your story, and I know you don't share it often, so thank you for sharing it here, is that you really struggled with finding a sense of belonging in your own family from the very beginning of your life. So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
It's always so fun to do this with you. As Carolyn mentioned, I was adopted when I was young, very young. I spent the first sort of bit doing foster care with this family and eventually adopted me. And it was, sort of I always joke about it being, my parents were the Angelina Jolie of the 70s in the Midwest with a lot less money. My parents are of German descent, both white. They adopted 6 kids, but they were also foster parents. And I was the second that they adopted. So I grew up in a white family, in a white environment, in a multicultural family. And so it absolutely was one of those things where I spent most of my childhood trying to figure out where I fit. And it was sort of just part of who I was.
One of the things that was, I think, unforgettable for me when I interviewed you was that, you hear a lot of things over the years interviewing people, but you didn't just struggle with where you fit. You did not know your race.
Right.
You were not sure what your race was. You knew you were not like your parents. You were part of this multicultural family, and you were confronted pretty early with people questioning that and telling you what you were. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, our society is very focused on race, always has been, and when you don't look like everyone else, it's, whether you're in a corporate environment, whether you're in a family, it's something that's recognized right away, and people have tons of questions. And so it was absolutely the case that, because of the fact that I was actually born the year that interracial adoption was first made legal in Pennsylvania, which is where I was adopted, and by interracial, I mean if you have any Black in you. So white people could adopt people of color as long as it wasn't Black. And so the agency where I was adopted actually lied to my parents and said that I was Portuguese because obviously racially ambiguous, it was easy to sort of, something other than Black. And so it was, I grew up sort of not knowing what I was and didn't find out until I was like late high school what my race actually was. But clearly I was had Black in me and just didn't really know what exactly the background was.
Right. And so just to clarify, you found out your biological background in high school, not like you were looking in the mirror and didn't know what you were. just so we're clear. You knew you had black in you, but you just were not sure.
I just wasn't sure the exact
what
makeup.
the specific.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when that is your reality for such a long time, and I know that you're very sensitive to your parents meant well, but they really didn't know what your experience was like, and it was difficult every day. But at some point, you decided, and I always say the narratives we tell ourselves are the most important narratives we will ever hear. And you decided, as hard as that was, it was a real advantage for you, particularly as you began your career, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, and maybe this is just something that was always inside of me, I always felt tremendously grateful for the situation that I was in, and I always knew that it could have been a lot worse, especially being in a family that was very familiar with the foster care system, where we had foster kids that came into our home temporarily, and I saw the environment they came from and often what they went back to. I always felt tremendously lucky, and my parents were very much focused on just giving us the absolute best life possible, and also very focused on making sure we felt like we were adding to their lives as much as they were adding to ours. And so I never, even when people would say in front of us, which happened often, you're so lucky to have been, adopted by these great people, my parents' response was always, we're as lucky as they are. And so I always felt that sense of gratitude, and just always sort of had it in me that I just wanted to make the very best life for myself and set myself up so that I could be, independently successful. From the youngest age I can remember, that was always something that was inside of me.
One of the things you said in the book that we highlighted was that there is not one successful personality type.
Yeah.
And you're very upfront about the fact that you're not the big voice in the room. You have an extraordinary career. You've broken tremendous barriers yourself. First black woman on the Facebook board. But when that happened, and it made all this news, it was a little bit of a taken aback moment for you. You were surprised and you were concerned. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a couple of reasons. One, it did take me by surprise that the headlines were first black woman on the Facebook board. And, a lot of all of the sort of insecurities of growing up and the sort of focus around race, and, I was very concerned that there would be a response of like, well, if that's what they consider black, I can see, just the whole race thing we have within our own people came, and I just sort of felt like people would look up my background, not necessarily know my story, say like, she's not even black, she has white parents, and so, I just didn't know that was going to be the big focus, like first black woman. I thought it was going to be this woman from PayPal joined the Facebook board, and so I was taken aback, and I was concerned about, sort of the authenticity, whether people would sort of see it as like authentically what the headline was. And so I was concerned about that. And, also I just have always been a very private person, as much as I've really sought to continue to grow my career and be put into as many opportunities as I could to, gain success. I've never really been about wanting to be in the room and center of attention, that kind of stuff. And so I was just concerned about what was to come, honestly.
You also haven't really been about wanting to be the only one. That
Yes.
bothered you. And so I know you say there are two types of black people, two types of women. What are the two types?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are those that sort of relish in the idea of being the only one or the first one and sort of, see it as a stamp of success. And then there are those that sort of view it as a sign of how much progress there is still to be had. And I very much place myself in, I don't want to be the only one. I want us all to have success together because it's going to make it a lot more fun. And so, I think, so for me, I was like, why are we celebrating this? Because, it's great that we're making progress, but it should be a non-issue, and it should be something that isn't even there to discuss because there's so many. And I also have always felt like it's very limiting to, there's the saying, you can't be who you don't see. And, I think a lot of us talk about, we need to put more women in the boardroom or women in the C-suite, black women in the C-suite, because people need to see what's possible. And what I always teach my kids is don't wait to see it to be it, because it's way too limiting if you need to see it to be it. No, figure out what you want to do, figure out what you aspire to, and go after it, and don't worry about whether you see it there already.
You're also really intentional about pushing yourself to do the things that are particularly hard for you, given your personality type.
Yeah.
And I know you've described yourself as an introvert. There was a conversation I heard some women having last night about, I'm an introvert. How do I network? How do I handle this sales job? How do I level up?
Yeah.
And I know you have really specific feelings about that. I asked you once, what are you unapologetic about? You were like, I'm unapologetically reserved.
Mm-hmm.
So, which doesn't make you go, well, let me ask you another question. It's kind of like, thanks, sit down. But how do you come to that? How are you able to, when you are the only black woman at the table, on the leadership committee, in the room, in a global setting, how do you really own that without having it be a limitation?
Yeah, well, I will say that I think that what people most appreciate is authenticity. And, that's great. That's great for all of us, because it's easiest to be yourself, right? And so you want to just become the best version of who you are, right? And that's going to be the easiest thing than trying to, become something you're not. It is true that, it takes a lot of energy for me to be in a social setting where I don't know people and having to go up and make conversation. And so, I've had to find ways to practice doing that, because if you want to be successful, you have to be able to do that sometimes, but you don't have to do it nonstop. So this conference is going on all weekend. Maybe it would be a lot to go to every session and go meet new people, if you have the kind of personality where that's not natural. But you have to decide that you're going to do it sometimes. If you look at what I'm doing today, I'm the global head of sales at PayPal. That is a lot of social interaction, right? And I actually sought this role out because it is great practice to learn how to credibly make conversation, build relationships, be able to get your point across, ask for business. These are things that are going to help you no matter what you do next. And so I find myself looking for opportunities to practice the things that aren't easy. And then you can decide if you want to do them in small doses, right? I'm always going to have my very small set of friends that I am most comfortable around. But that doesn't mean that I can't be successful in a setting where that isn't naturally what's comfortable for me. And I think a lot of that did come from my childhood. I grew up in an environment where I never really fully fit in or felt like I was, one of the people, whether I was in a setting with all people of color, all black people, all white people, never really felt completely comfortable. And I would say that that is an advantage when I'm in situations where I'm in Asia and I'm the only woman or I'm the only woman of color, because I'm used to that feeling. And I think it's important that, and I'm sure this resonates with a lot of people in the room, it's important to get used to that feeling and be okay with it and still be able to thrive.
Have there been moments, though, when you couldn't, when the situation was so difficult? I think we were also struck watching, the congressional hearings this week. And there are just times when you've got to draw on something beyond anything you've drawn on before. Were there times, can you identify a time when sort of you had to bring something else to bear to tap into that thing that makes you say, no, I belong here, I'm good here, I'm going to nail this anyway?
Yeah, I think, and even just in watching those hearings, what came to mind immediately is these hearings are not about her. She is more than qualified, and they know it. And this is not about her, right? And I think in a lot of situations, that's been what I've gone to. You know, if you think about being in settings where, you know, you don't feel like you're getting a fair shake or people aren't seeing your talent, it's not about you. And you just have to tell yourself that. You have to be confident in what you know you bring. And in those situations where you feel like someone's not seeing it, which can be tremendously frustrating, just remind yourself that it's, you know who you are and you know what you bring. And this isn't about me. This is about everything else going on in the world, you know.
You also said that you have a very much the, tell me no, then watch me run personality,
Yes.
that chip that's like, I'm going to prove this to you. And we talked about this, right, that we all come from families and there's nature versus nurture. I think when you're adopted, you think about what really comes to bear most in your life. And in your family, your siblings have all run the gamut of what has happened for them and how they've been able to navigate life coming from the same circumstances. So how much of your makeup and everything you bring to bear do you think is really innate, or what pieces do you think just you came to the world with these things versus those things that you had to develop and continue to have to develop?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always a mix. And it is true that when you're adopted, you do spend a lot of time thinking about nature versus nurture because, when you're growing up, you don't see your people, like you're not around blood.
You don't look like anybody.
You don't look like anybody. All the sort of things that people say about mannerisms, even if, you don't look alike, you don't necessarily see those things. And then when you have kids, and if they're, I have kids that are my biological kids, and that was the first time I had experienced what a biological bond feels like, right? And I think that, so you do spend a lot of time thinking about nature versus nurture and, are there things that, so I do think it's a mix. I will say though that I've always had fight in me, always. I have always been someone who could motivate myself and could sort of like talk to myself quietly about what I needed to do in order to be okay and what I needed to do in terms of just, making progress in a lot of different areas. And I think that's really, really helped me. But also my parents were also very much about you can be whatever you want. My mom is a professor of math and computer science. She's 80 years old, and she has a PhD in math and computer science, which was unheard of at the time for a woman. And so I grew up in an environment where there was no reason you can't do it if you want to do it and you work hard. And so I think it's both, for sure.
One of the things that is interesting that I think is important to talk about here, although we, for whatever reasons, don't often go here, is the personal side of your life. And we're not going to talk about work-life balance because we're all sick of it, and we know it doesn't exist.
There's no such thing.
Right, and we know it doesn't exist. But there is such a thing as overarching in your professional pursuits, having your dreams and goals in that area, and the personal side falling to the wayside.
Yes.
And you're looking up after a number of years and saying, this didn't come together the way I planned. And you got married at 40, and you very much wanted to have children, particularly because you had been adopted.
Right.
And you wanted to look into a face that looked like yours, which I can identify with. And that journey was really difficult. Can you share that?
Yeah, I turned 50 this year, and thank you. And, when you hit that milestone, or 60 or 70 or 40, people always are like, wow, how do you feel? And when I turned 50, I felt like 50 was so much easier for me than 40 was. And the reason was I actually got married at 39, but I didn't have any kids, and I hadn't done what I would encourage anyone in this room that is below 40, freeze your eggs. Freeze your eggs, okay? Because it gives you options, right? And I hadn't done that. And so I was extremely stressed about the idea of whether I was even going to be able to have kids. And thank God it worked, but it wasn't easy. I mean, I was still climbing my career. I was 40 years old. I had my first son at 41 and my second at 46. I also inherited one who lived with us, who was 11 when we got married, and he lived with us. And so I did already have a child to raise, but I really wanted one of my own. And it wasn't easy. I had multiple miscarriages, but I was really, really, really focused on doing it. And so, what I always say to women is you absolutely can have it all, but you need to think about what your sort of like near-term priorities are and make sure you're making decisions around that. So, at the time when I was trying to have kids, I was running rent.com. So I had a very busy job, but I told myself, I'm not going to seek that next thing until I get this taken care of, right? Because you just have to sort of sequence your priorities to make sure that you can give full focus on the things that are most important to you. And so, I think that you absolutely can have it all at the same time, and thank God it worked out for me. But you have to decide sort of what your main priorities are at each stage in your life.
So you mentioned you had 9 miscarriages.
I did.
Right? And there were days you said when you had a miscarriage and went to work.
Yeah.
So I think these are the kinds of things that don't get talked about enough between us.
Yeah.
So what did it take? What was that got you through those days when you lost a baby and then had to be in a meeting?
I mean, I probably was not my best self, for sure. But I also was just always focused on the end goal. It's just something that it's just been something that's been in me. I was always focused on, okay, so what's next? And I am very good at sort of compartmentalizing, personal things and what I need to get done at work and what I need to do just to wrap the day or whatever. And so I think it was just, my poor husband, who I, knew I could lean on, and just compartmentalizing and being focused on, what I was going to do next to get where I wanted to be.
And how open were you at work about
Not
what?
at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not
at all.
Did you think about that? Is that just your personality?
So I will say that it's something that I continuously work on. I think a lot of us, I've heard a lot of people talk about, there's my work self and then there's my personal self. And I definitely was that person. I have found, though, that as I've, grown my career more and more, people really appreciate getting to know people individually, especially their leaders, because it helps them realize that we all are human and we're all dealing with all of our stuff, and it makes them feel like it's possible to have all of this going on that I'm not sharing, but still, persevere and be successful. And so I've tried to get better. It's something I continue to work on, about sharing. Maybe not, I wouldn't share all that, but I do try to share some of the personal side or some of the struggles that I have, because I think it enables you to really get to know people better, like authentically, and also shows people that you can be successful even if you have a lot going on in your life,
Yeah. So at this stage of your life, you just turned 50. You're on, boards, and you have this extraordinarily demanding global career, and you have 2 very young boys.
Yeah.
What is the toughest phase you've been through in trying to just navigate keeping all those balls in the air, and how did you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as women, we always feel like we're not dedicating the right amount of mind share to the most important things, whether it's, at work or at home or with your kids, with your husband, your relationship. It's hard to feel like you're doing it all as much as, as well as you should be. I do think in some ways COVID was a blessing for me because, not COVID, but the situation that we found ourselves in with the world shutting down and not being able to travel, because my youngest was 2.5 when the world shut down. I was new in this sort of global sales role, and so I was traveling over 50% of the time, and it was all international travel. And so it was, and my husband, it works at BlackRock and travels as well. So it was really logistically challenging to get that done. Thank God I have my husband's parents live really close to, they've moved twice with us, at least to be in the same general area, and have been tremendously helpful in terms of us being able to build our careers. They view it as their role to help us be successful in our careers and be with their grandkids. And so they have been tremendously helpful, but the COVID time has enabled us to just spend more time at home because we were forced to. And that 2.5 year, sort of age was just a perfect time to not have to travel. And now, we're coming out of it, travel's gonna resume, and he's almost 5. And so at least we're in a position where he's had me for the last couple years a lot, and I'll feel a little less guilty about getting back out on the road, I think.
But you do feel guilty.
Always. I think we all feel guilty about, no matter what our situation is, you feel guilty that you're not doing everything you can. And what I try to think about, my mom was a professor, my dad was an engineer, my mom was not at all of our stuff, and, she wasn't able to, I don't even know how she got everything done. 6 kids, cleaned her own house, made food every night, I don't even know. But I will say that I look back and I appreciate everything she did professionally. I am so proud of the career that she pulled off and is still doing. And so I remind myself how important it is for our kids to see women that are successful and women that are dedicated to their craft or their career and trying to be something other than just taking care of them.
Yeah.
And so I try to remind myself of that because I know that's how I feel. I had never even thought about, she wasn't at everything or whatever. They're going to say that occasionally, but they appreciate who you are as a person if you're running your life properly, I think.
We talk a lot now about the new normal, right? We're stepping into this new time and this new space, and we've all been changed in some way. So many people are exhausted.
Yeah.
Because COVID has had lots of silver linings, but it's had incredible demands, lots of isolation, lots of corporate restructuring, and that's dumped a whole bunch of stuff on people.
Yeah.
And they're really trying to figure it
Yeah.
out. What do you say to women who are just feeling okay, I think I'm ready,
Yeah.
but I'm also really worn out?
Yeah. I would add all of the unrest in our country over the last few years, which we all know has been there the entire time, but has come to the forefront and is now sort of part of this everyday conversation. And if, for those of us that are in corporate environments, we're expected to sort of address it and be part of the solution and, all of that while you're trying to do all of that. And so exhaustion is a very, it's a very accurate way. It's a very accurate term for how I think a lot of us are probably feeling. And what I would say is that just make sure you check in on yourself and think about the fact that you can't help anyone else unless you're okay yourself. I love the fact that sort of this focus on mental health is, front and center now, and hopefully in our communities we're going to realize that it's not a sign of weakness to seek help if you need help, and it's not a sign of weakness to lean on each other and to ask for professionals to help guide us through this, because we need to be there mentally well for our families, for our work, for our friends. And so I would just say that, we have to make sure that we're checking on each other and checking on ourselves, and that's got to be the first priority.
And if you could go back and talk to your younger self, knowing everything that you know now and knowing what she went through, what would you tell her so that she could avoid some of the stuff that you've dealt with?
I think one of the things, I feel very comfortable now with who I am. And I think part of, being in the circles where, I'm around so many different personality types that are all successful in different ways with their own personalities, many of which people would view as very quirky or, very, not mainstream, but realizing that talent comes in all forms and we all have sort of a role to play here. I wish, especially around the things around race, I wish I would have just sort of been okay with who I was earlier and not worried about it. I've gotten a lot of questions like, wow, it must have been hard to grow up in a family that's white, and but I've always kind of felt like, yeah, but I feel like everyone else has had a more of an issue with it than I did. It became an issue for me because it was an issue for everyone else, and that's, and I think there's so many situations that are like that, where I wish I could have told myself, just focus on who you are and be okay with who you are, and if someone else has a problem with it, then that's their problem, and just keep moving on and moving ahead. And so that would be what I would hope to tell my younger self, and what I try to instill in my kids today.
I know we're going to go to questions after this, so if you have questions, do we have mics? How are we? Yes, there's a mic right there. So if you have questions, please let her know so we can get to them next. You mentioned a mentor. I know you've had several, but in this whole struggle to be comfortable with yourself, and at some point we all recognize nobody's really comfortable with themselves.
Yes.
But still, day to day, you always end up feeling like it's only me, but you had a mentor.
Yeah.
You know the story of them. So can you just tell them?
Yeah.
Because this was a game change for you.
So when I was at eBay, the CEO was this guy, John Donahoe, who is now the CEO at Nike. And take a minute and look him up and look at his picture, because it'll sort of bring to life if you don't know who he is offhand. But when he was at eBay, he had right before he left, he gathered a group of women that he wanted to mentor, because he's very much about legacy and helping the next generation. And I was lucky enough to be one of the people that he had selected to help mentor. And he did these little circles with us. I think he did 2 separate groups, and each group was about 10 people. And so it was small enough that you got to know each other as well. And he would just spend time answering our questions, or talking about different themes, talking about himself and how he made it. He had a very storied career. He had run Bain. He had a wife who was, I believe, the ambassador to Switzerland. He was at eBay as the CEO, and now he's the CEO, after a short stint as the CEO of ServiceNow, the CEO at Nike, which was always a dream of his. And he is a very tall, blonde, white man. And he told us this one time, which has always stuck with me, that when he's in rooms and there are all these successful people, he never feels like he measures up. And I was looking at this tall, white, blonde, good-looking guy who has had so much success, and I could not believe that that's how he felt. But it was so helpful to hear him say that, because you realize that everyone feels that way.
Yeah.
And whether it's a parent, or whether it's something that you would never guess, it's in all of us. And so that can give you the feeling that you just have to sort of set it aside and persevere ahead. And it was tremendously helpful for me.
Yeah, and rare for a man to sort of be that vulnerable and free you, hopefully, from that.
Absolutely.
There's a question?
Hello, Deborah Owens, Corporate Alley Cat. This has been a great conversation. The question is, you talked about being an introvert. I work with people who really struggle navigating the corporate arena because they are introverts. Can you share tips and strategies you used early in your career to connect
absolutely.
with people?
I have to know to follow the light. I was trying to figure out where the voice came from. Yes. So what I would say is, I think, one of the things to remember is that when people say that they're an introvert, it talks to where you get your energy from. It doesn't mean that, you aren't able to speak to others, or you would prefer to be in a basement room by yourself. That is not what it means to be an introvert. And I think it's important not only for those who are hearing that from someone, but also for the people that would describe themselves as introverts. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I think it's about finding what you're comfortable with and then pushing that limit. And so forcing yourself to practice what it means to go up to someone that you don't know and start a conversation, and do that in an authentic way. I think it's about ensuring that you are always having a mindset of curiosity, or truly wanting to understand other people. Introverts can do that too, actually care about who people are and learning more about them. And if you actually are authentic authentically interested in getting to know another person, then it's not that hard to think about what you might want to know about them. And that's the start of the conversation. And then if you practice that enough, then you're going to become more comfortable doing that. And it doesn't mean that you have to do it for 3 days straight all day long. But it means that you should be comfortable doing that in a work setting, in a social setting, and it becomes easier when you practice it.
We have another question. My publisher's going to be mad. This was supposed to be like that the whole time.
Buy her book.
Good afternoon. Josetta Coleman with J.P. Morgan Chase.
Hello.
Please tell us about a mistake or no you may have experienced that ended up being the best thing that happened for your career growth.
Gosh, I've made a lot of mistakes. So I will say that early in my career, when I was still in consulting, I had a manager who I felt was not at all interested in my development and just made it very difficult for me to enjoy my job. And to the point, and I'm sure many of you have been in the situation where you're sort of questioning whether you even want to be at this job, and I almost quit. And this was like pretty early in my career. I think I was like a second year consultant. And I ended up being there for 9 years, so it didn't end there. But I was lucky enough to have a partner there that I could confide in. And I talked to him about the fact that I just didn't feel like I could be successful in this environment with this manager. And one of the pieces of advice that he gave me was, he said, so help me understand, so you're going to quit because you don't like this manager. What if tomorrow that manager quit? Would that have been a good decision for you to have quit? And basically what he was saying is that you should never make a decision based on another person. And that is, as it relates to, there's people who just like follow other people from job to job. That's not always the smartest thing to do either. Although I do think, you end up working with the same people in your career. If they're great, they're going to attract you to the next thing. But make sure you're always thinking about what's right for you and your career and not just about another person, good or bad. And that was a piece of advice that I thought was very helpful that sort of followed me throughout my career.
We are going to wrap here. I want to first just thank all of you for being here and thank Peggy Alford. I should have mentioned at the top that we were expecting one more person from the book, LaFonza Butler, who's the first black head of Emily's List, the PAC that funds women to run for office. And at the very last minute, she wasn't able to be here. But she sends her love and best wishes and hopes that you will support Emily's List, which is such important work right now, and she's working on voting rights as well. Peggy, it is phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming to share with us today.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy.
And we didn't plan this.
I know.
We know it looks like we did, but we actually did not. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Great job. Yay. I'm dying of thirst.
Yes.
What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? That is as solemn as it is sweet, with an outpouring of soul that connects us. Joy in resilience. Joy in creativity. Joy in happiness. Joy in strength. What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? A joy supreme. AARP celebrates Black joy. Visit us at aarp.org/Black community.